UNSC destroyers combine heavy armament with high speed and thick armor. These small warships use wolfpack tactics to engage Covenant vessels with coordinated MAC gun fire and hit-and-run tactics, overwhelming their targets' defenses, which were often superior. Before we start, I'd like to say I've never done a video like this before. It was a lot more research than I'm used to, so I'd appreciate a like after the video if you like it, and I guess a dislike if you don't, that's fine too. The UNSC Halberd-Class light destroyer is manufactured by Synoviet Heavy Machinery, the same manufacturer is responsible for the majority of UNSC warships, such as the Stalwart-Class, the Paris-Class, the Autumn-Class, and the Marathon-Class, to name a few. It was brought into the UNSC fold in 2508, and was the most commonly used UNSC destroyer throughout the Insurrection and Human Covenant War. The Halberd-Class destroyer served an attack escort role, sporting a crew of 250 Navy personnel and 50 Marines, although they seem to have frequently bussed additional personnel, requiring the crew to use their individually allocated sleeping pods in shifts. It's mentioned in multiple sources just how lacking this ship was in recreational facilities due to its compact size. The Halberd-Class is 485 meters long, just under 1,600 feet, but weighs in at 1.8 million metric tons, making it one of the shortest but most densely built UNSC ships in the entire fleet. While the bridge of the Halberd-Class still sits at an elevated position to maximize visibility, as UNSC Navy guidelines demand, the bridge has a much more subtle position and silhouette when compared to other UNSC ships. Namely, frigates like the Paris-Class, where the bridge juts out of the top, due to the ship's overall blocky, modular-looking design. The bridge of the Halberd-Class, on the other hand, would be harder to immediately pick out, due in part to the ship's arrowhead design, coupled with the massive titanium A armor plates that cover the entire MAC cannon and inhabited portions, as well as two outward flared plates protecting the engines on its abaft flanks. On the keel of the Halberd-Class, you'll find the Hangar, featuring a specialized set of gravity generators that decelerate oncoming small craft and accelerate them at launch. Traditional electromagnetic hooks and arrestor cables are still fitted for emergencies. Within the hangar, each halberd carries a maximum of 2 Pelican dropships, so you can imagine how small of a hangar this is. Halberd-Class destroyers are propelled by 4 primary and 4 secondary high-thrust fusion drives. Powered by massive reactors, the rear thrusters generate both power and forward propulsion, using deuterium and helium-3 fuel mixed with hydrogen or water reaction mass. The superheated exhaust is then redirected with thrust vectoring plates and magnetic fields to increase the destroyer's maneuverability. The ship's armament included 4 Rampart point defense guns, 26 M58 Archer missiles, and 1 14 B11R2 MAC battery, with 2 spinal-mounted twin-linked launch rails. The primary launch rail, a 1,170mm high-velocity coil gun, is fit for all standard MAC munition packages, such as hyperdense kinetic kill slugs and semi-autonomous drone missiles. The secondary rail, a 647mm coil gun, was built for kinetic rounds only. The MAC battery is not powered by the fusion engines in the rear as is the rest of the ship, but by spare capacitor cells stored underneath the armor plates on the amidships port and starboard. Fast, and requiring only a small crew, what the Halberd-Class destroyer lacks in general purpose utility, it makes up for in firepower. The most notable ships of this class are the UNSC Pioneer, the UNSC Heart of Midlothian, and the UNSC Iroquois. The Pioneer was the staging ship of Operation Talon, the first operation ever undertaken by Spartan IIs. The strike team consisted of Samuel 034, Linda 058, Kelly 087, Frederick 104, and John 117, forming, for the first time, the legendary Blue Team. Their mission was to apprehend the insurrectionist leader Colonel Robert Watts, and was successful. After reacquiring a stolen Pelican, the UNSC Pioneer retrieved them at the extraction point. The UNSC Heart of Midlothian, aside from having one of the most badass ship names in all of sci-fi, was the first ship attacked in the Human Covenant War, where the reason behind the attack was simply the ship's navigational data, which would lead the Covenant to other human colonies, including Earth. The ship self-destructed after the attack's sole survivor, ODST Michael Baird, allowed the enemy to kill him, giving the shipboard AI, Mo Ye, the authorization to destroy the ship along with the boarding party and navigational data. And finally, the UNSC Iroquois was commissioned in April 2552, the final year of the war, and was the first ship to respond to a Covenant fleet en route to Sigma Octantis IV just 3 months later, on July 17th. Fit with 3 Shiva-class nuclear warheads and captained by the one and only Captain Jacob Keyes, it, as a lone, small ship, engaged a Covenant carrier, destroyer, and 2 frigates, and destroyed the entire fleet with the exception of its lead carrier, which disengaged and retreated. During the engagement, the Iroquois sidesteps 2 plasma torpedoes, physically grazes a Covenant destroyer, damaging its shields, finishes off the destroyer after allowing the trailing plasma torpedoes from the frigate to hit it, taking down the rest of its shields, and hitting it with a Shiva nuke. It then slingshot around Sigma Octantis IV and handily took down the 2 Covenant frigates with its Mac cannon and Archer missiles. This tactic is now referred to as the Keyes Loop, and it deserves its own entire video. But it is the best example of why the Halberd-Class's superior maneuverability and heavy armament made it a force of nature it was on the battlefield. I love the Halberd-Class. It is my absolute favorite ship class in the entire Halo universe. I have individual ships that I prefer, but when it comes to an entire class, it's not even close. The armor plates on the side just give it this dangerous look, like it's a huge rocket-propelled knife cutting right through space. And it's just the right size for a destroyer in my opinion, not too big, but big enough to believe it could be a threat to ships larger than it. Its maneuverability was definitely its strongest attribute, as the Keyes Loop showed pretty handily. The Iroquois sidesteps plasma torpedoes pretty easily as far as I can tell, and the armor plating allowed it to damage a Covenant destroyer's shields by physically grazing it without taking any notable damage. Unfortunately, we never see a Halberd-Class in-game, or mentioned much at all in 2552 after the Keyes Loop. It's driven home time and again how much more effective at both destroying enemy ships and tanking damage Covenant ships were, especially at the beginning decade of the war. I do wonder how much use a ship specialized in destroying other ships could be if the enemy ship's defenses were far more advanced in every conceivable way. What good is a destroyer that can't destroy? So that could explain why they sort of fell out of fashion in favor of frigates and more general purpose ships. And it should be mentioned that not every captain was as good as Keyes. In fact, it seems like the only tactician better than Keyes, or even at his level, was Admiral Preston J. Cole. The difficulty of utilizing a halberd, along with its admittedly poor general-purpose use, could be why it was seemingly phased out toward the end of the war. We see the UNSC adopt a much more frigate-heavy fleet doctrine before the war ends. I can see how standardizing the fleet to a more general-purpose line of ships would be useful during those times at the end of the war when human was only ever on the back foot. But not a single class of destroyer was included in the post-war fleet line initiative, which I think is a huge mistake. Now that human technology was on par with Covenant remnants, and better in some areas, they should definitely have been using that to create a more wide-ranging fleet. The UNSC Infinity, may she rest in peace, had a unique and intuitive feature that was that she could carry 10 underslung heavy frigates. This provided her 10 extra mobile Mac cannons and a lot of versatility and range, as well as the Archer missiles and who knows whatever weapons were on those ships. I haven't done a breakdown for those yet, I don't know. Now, as cool as this is, imagine if instead of 10 heavy frigates, she carried maybe 5 heavy frigates and 6 or 7 upgraded versions of the Halberd-Class light destroyer. One with shields, better engines, better Macs. You'd have the Infinity with all her firepower, her flanks covered by the frigates, with fast and powerful destroyers zipping around the battlefield like it's nobody's business. I'll end this video with a request to 343 Industries. If you ever want to appease the Halo Wars crowd again, as you did with Halo Wars 2, please, space battles, and a new destroyer design inspired by the Halberd. That would be very cool. But that's all for this video. I hope you liked it, and for the next one I'll probably be doing another Halo ship, or maybe a Star Wars ship for the next breakdown, and if you haven't, please subscribe. I also have a main channel other than this one. It's a hair's breadth away from 100 subscribers as of writing this, which would be very cool. I'd like another 0, it would make me feel good. Bye-bye. The Mac battery is not powered by fusion engines in the rear, as is the rest of the ship, but by spare capacitors stored underneath the armor plates on the amidships port and starboard. Starboard?